TheBausffs is one of the most unique Challenger players League has ever seen. He's a notorious Sion main, known as the inventor of INTING SION, becoming famous for his odd playstyle and strange decision making that even high elo players struggle to understand. His style is so impressive that as his popularity has grown, so has the popularity of Sion, increasing at the same rate as his stream getting viewership. So we're going to take a look at how his playstyle actually works, why he makes these weird decisions, whether he prefers AD or tank Sion, and how he was even able to make it to Korean Challenger with this pick. But first, this video is sponsored by Opera GX Browser, the browser optimized for gamers that lets you limit the amount of CPU usage and RAM it can take to make sure it doesn't make you lag, while also having integrations like Twitch as well as Discord, so you can get all of your entertainment in one place without having to have a ton of programs open. But they also have some new features like GX Profiles that lets you customize your browser exactly to your needs. Maybe your PC is getting old and struggling to run stuff, you can set your profile to potato mode, letting you browse and game with minimal lag. Maybe you're trying to study or work and don't want notifications to distract you. This mode can turn those off. If you're sick of the boring default look of browsers, then Opera GX has a ton of customization options, including animated wallpapers that you can select from, which even have League champions. And if you're still struggling to swap from another browser, Opera now has a quick import tool to move all of your cookies, history, and bookmarks over to Opera, making the transition seamless. I've been using Opera browser for basically a full year now and really recommend it. And best of all, it's completely free, so please download Opera and give it a try from the link in the description below. Back to Sion. BAUS has been a League player since the early seasons, but his story with Sion began in Season 8. He became known as a high elo Sion player, already being able to hit EUS Challenger, but his playstyle was nothing like the Sions of that time. Back then, Sion was only a full tank frontliner, but BAUS saw him differently. Ever since then, he has played Sion mostly as a full AD pick that can 1v1 enemies and carry games. One thing that makes him special is that he actually loves playing League, and especially even after all of these years finds it super fun to play in high Challenger, and his success has been huge. He's hit rank 1 on EU West, and now also reached Korean Challenger in Season 12. So BAUS is probably the hardest player to analyze in League. When you watch his stream, some of the decisions he makes just don't look normal, so I watched a ton of his Korean replays, and studied his VODs, to find out how it really works from the man himself. The classic BAUS gameplay starts at level 1, where he often just dies 1 versus 1 for first blood. In almost everyone's experience, this is a terrible idea, but there is a reason he does it. This is actually his strategy for difficult matchups, dying on purpose. The reason for it is very smart. In these bad matchups, BAUS has two options. He can sit back, collect a couple of CS in every wave and try not to die, slowly falling behind and let the enemy get a big advantage. Or he can walk up and contest the wave, putting pressure on the enemy top. Usually in these bad matchups, the Sion does end up dying, because the fight just isn't winnable. But BAUS doesn't mind, because by dying, he's able to not only get some CS, but also get a big chunk of damage onto the enemy top laner, which he's then able to take advantage of to get ahead. Even in Sion's worst matchup against a Darius, where the level 1 is horrible and Sion can't do a single thing in lane, BAUS gets zoned off the wave by this Challenger Darius player, but he does manage to get a pretty great amount of damage traded back. So immediately BAUS teleports back in, and Darius cannot stay around or risks dying, so Darius is forced back to base, leaving Sion to control exactly where he wants the wave to be. So BAUS chooses to freeze in front of his tower, forcing Darius to overextend every time he wants to get CS. So thanks to this inting play, BAUS now has a chance to win the lane. But of course he doesn't do this every game, because some matchups are pretty good. In normal matchups, BAUS instead can start W and walk up to begin trading. He collects CS, taking Q at level 2 and E at level 3. With this he can look to set up a kill, engaging with E on a minion to slow, pressing W at the same time, which lets Sion walk up for poke, having the shield explosion and also possibly a charged up Q. If he lands the Q stun, he can then disengage, walking away to safety, waiting for the combo to come back up again, and doing it once more, using his E slow to set up the Q for an undodgeable knockup that sets up a kill. It's very unlikely you're going to land Q on a Challenger player, so he's always doing E first to slow them, meaning they'll never be able to walk out of it. The way he uses W is opposite to most Sion players, with the main focus focus being the AoE damage that it deals, not the shield that it gives. This means the most important thing to him is the poke. For maximum value, you want to use it to block damage and still get the explosion damage off, and the way that BAUS does this is by letting the enemy burst him, using all of their abilities, and then shielding when they can no longer get through it, letting him get both the value from the shield and the damage as well. But this is all pretty normal. Here is where his laning starts to get super unique. Challenger players are the best in the game at optimizing how they use their time, but BAUS, I would say, does this even better than anyone else. Every time he has a spare second, he's doing something extra. Like here, he gets a kill, so he shoves lane to get a plate and an extra wave. Then he knows he's super strong, so instead of basing, or sitting and waiting at the enemy tower, he invades to steal a camp. The enemy top lane is busy with the wave, and Sion knows he can't be collapsed on, so this spare time is used super effectively. This is why he's known for loving Krugs. He doesn't just kill it for the extra gold, he kills it because it's the main objective he has that's up and available. Shoving wave and leaving lane, Krugs are his only option. A worse top laner would stay in lane, possibly dying to a gank, or even leave lane to do a risky roam, which could end up losing you your tower, but BAUS is always back in time to catch the wave. In bad matchups where he can't push the wave, he instead goes for proxy farm, walking through fog of war behind enemies, clearing the wave as fast as he can and returning into the fog. This makes him such a pain, and even if he gets collapsed on, he can at least shove the wave. So even in this game where he's 0-5, he gets collapsed on by 3 people, but still manages to kill the CS, which means the enemies can't take his top tower, so BAUS just wastes all of their time and forces them to base because they have to help bot lane. His main objective when he has time by himself is to use Demolish on the enemy tower to get tower plates, as this sets him up to win lane, and after he wins lane, getting tower, he can then control the whole map. He cares so much about timing and priority that he takes minion dematerializer and uses it on cannon minions, making one-shotting the wave much easier, so he can spend time doing more important things. But it's not just his plays that are special. As a person, he's also quite unique. Even when he messes up a play horribly, he remains locked in on his decision making, not tilting even after this pretty awful death that even wastes his flash. Immediately he's stabilized, not just shoving the wave, instead just killing cannon minion to set up a freeze, again to make his lane easier to play. Unlike some players, he never allows himself to be emotionally motivated to make a play. On Sion, he pushes everything to the maximum, always fully charging his Q for maximum damage and CC, always taking every advantage he can get in any situation. And at level 6 he gets ult, using a special button combination to increase the CC duration, which makes his ult really OP. Instead of just ulting someone and then trying to land abilities during the knockup, 100% of the time BAUS instead cancels his ultimate by pressing the R key again as he gets on top of the enemy. The knockup still lands, and also creates a second CC, which stuns the enemy, giving him just enough time to charge up another Q to get another knockup while the enemy still can't move. This sets up all of his damage and lets him 1v1 people. If you don't do this every time you ult, your win rate will just decrease. You can also use the unstoppable part of the ult to dodge CC, which can make some champions super useless against Sion, as you can just run through their stun and kill them. In mid game, he keeps looking for kills 1v1 with Fog of War. If required, he may need to use his passive, which again he optimizes very specifically. When he's chasing someone, he moves between every hit to maximize the damage, and if you're missing lots of kills in your passive, then making sure you try and land your E for the slow before you die, making it much easier to get the kill. Buying his first item, which for AD Sion is Prowler's Claw, Sion benefits a lot from the AD that this item gives, with his Q having great AD scaling, so now he can look for kills on almost any top laner. But again, BAUS has one main way of using this item. If he dies during a fight, he saves his Prowlers until he's in his passive, giving him a gap closer to catch up and collect a kill. If you use it while Sion is still alive, then his abilities don't really work very well with it, but it does make your passive a lot better. Then, instead of playing like a normal tank and grouping with his team, BAUS again does something that tank players don't usually do, focusing instead on being in a side lane for as long as he possibly can. There are 2 reasons for this. The first is that he's fully focused on becoming the strongest champion in the game, and he does this by getting more XP and more farm. He knows that Sion's biggest power spike is level 16, and that he's really strong after getting a few items, so that's all he cares about. The huge advantage of this splitting playstyle is how stupidly strong you get compared to the enemy carries. While they've been grouping and doing lots of fighting to try and snowball the game, BAUS is in a side lane out-leveling everyone, having so many items that not even Red Smite can stop him. The other reason he loves splitting is to avoid Sion's main weakness, teamfighting. This champion can be an amazing teamfighter in certain situations, especially with the tank build, where your goal is to be an unkillable frontline, but with the AD build, teamfights are not easy at at all, due to your lack of mobility, which makes you vulnerable to CC. Instead, he goes for 1 versus 1 kills in a side lane, and uses that advantage to push towers, inhib, and try and end the game. He only joins fights with this build if you can push his wave to force someone to respond, which creates an uneven fight, which BAUS plays absolutely perfectly, knowing exactly how to enter the fight, how to get all of the kills, and maximize their advantage. But even with tank Sion, split pushing is just stupidly strong. All you really need to know is that in this game, BAUS is 1 and 9, but has Sunfire Cape as well as perfect CS from being in a side lane, which lets him casually 1 versus 2 inside the enemy base. Even with all of these deaths, he's still ahead of enemies, with all of the deaths not really mattering after Sion is scaled up. BAUS believes that his macro isn't even that good, but Sion as a champion is just unable to be collapsed on. If one enemy comes, BAUS can 1v1 them. He pushes wave and uses Fog of War to charge up his Q and W at the same time, releasing both for some huge burst damage. Or if multiple enemies collapse on him, BAUS can either look to go for a big ult combo to get a kill trade, or use ultimate to go for an escape. In high elo, BAUS isn't usually able to ult back to his own base, as enemies are smart enough to stand in front of him and block it, so he instead ults into the only clear area he can, inside the enemy base, which usually lets him create enough distance to escape, and can even come with an extra bonus. This works especially well as your ult does more damage the further you travel. Late game for BAUS is like watching a monk play League of Legends. It sounds weird, but as a top laner you have to accept the fact your team will win and lose fights when you're not there. BAUS understands this, and accepts that his job is to do the same, get advantages without his team. It's just as likely that his team can die in a 4 versus 4, that BAUS can just win the game by himself, meaning the fight doesn't matter, killing multiple towers and the Nexus alone with what he calls the BAUS Special, ulting into the center of the 2 Nexus towers, reactivating it to make sure his ult damage hits both, then using auto attacks and demolish to finish them off all in one move. To do this you must make sure that minions are in range to get the reduction in resistances, or it just won't work. It also mainly works with the AD build, as your ult scales with bonus AD, not with health. And speaking of builds, is AD or tank Sion better according to BAUS? Well, he says that tank Sion is good and it's a great default build to go, but in some matchups, for example Fiora, playing as a tank is miserable and it's basically unwinnable. So in a matchup like this, he would go AD, even though it's still not amazing. You're still likely to have a pretty hard time, but AD has a much better chance at winning the game in these hard matchups. BAUS has made a tier list of matchups so you can see which build to go, as well as how easy each one is. Usually I rate these picks before I give the full builds, but BAUS has created a meta all by himself, and recently even got the champion nerfed, so it doesn't really fit into our off-meta tier list. By the way, BAUS says that this won't really affect him at all, since he rarely uses his passive on towers. But if I can give you one message from his playstyle that you can use on any champion, it's this. A death in League is just a matter of perspective. You can be like the junglers I get in solo queue, where they die once and then AFK, stating that the game is over. Or you can be like BAUS, and use the death as an opportunity to create a tempo advantage, to review what your game plan is, or to see what your next play will be. You are the one who decides how you react to something bad. Here is his full build and runes. For both of his builds he starts Corrupting Potion first, then for the AD build he goes into Prowler's Claw, then a good lethality item to fit his needs in that game, for example movement speed or tank killing, then into Hullbreaker for the huge 1 versus 1 power. For his tank build, Sunfire Cape every game, as it's incredibly strong on Sion, especially when you get lots of farm. Again going into Hullbreaker for the side lane pressure, into Titanic so you still have quite a lot of damage, finishing the build off with tank items to fit the enemies. Phase Rush is best for the AD build so you can stay mobile, or Grasp as the tank so you get even more health. I'm sure you know exactly where to find BAUS if you want to see more of him, but I personally recommend his YouTube channel. It's got great editing and he's always playing at super high elo. Thanks again to our sponsor Opera, link to them is below, and thank you so much for watching.